Life doesn't warn you before it hits. One morning, everything feels steady. By evening, the ground has shifted. A decision you trusted turns against you. A relationship cracks without explanation. A plan you spent months building collapses in a single conversation. And in those moments when everything is loud and nothing is certain, there is one thing that decides what happens next. Not your talent, not your connections, not how hard you've worked. Your ability to stay calm. People underestimate this. They think calmness is softness. They associate it with passivity, with people who don't care enough to react. But that's the opposite of what it actually is. A calm mind is the sharpest instrument a person can carry. It sees through confusion while others are still processing the noise. It identifies the one move that matters while everyone else is burning energy on a dozen that don't. The Stoics understood this at a level most modern thinking hasn't caught up to. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire under near-constant siege wars on the frontier, a plague moving through the population, betrayals inside the palace walls. And still, he sat down each evening and wrote clearly about the day he had lived, not because his circumstances were manageable, because his mind was trained to stay clear inside unmanageable ones. That is what we're building today. The storm always comes. Most people deal with pressure the same way. They wait until it arrives, then they try to figure it out. And improvisation, under real pressure, the kind that narrows your vision and shortens your breath, almost never ends the way you hoped. The words come out wrong. The decision gets rushed. The regret comes later, when the dust has settled and you can finally see clearly again. There's a moment in every storm where you have a choice. You can be swept into its rhythm, reacting, scrambling, letting the chaos set the pace. Or you can create your own rhythm. But here's what most people miss entirely. That choice is not made in the storm. It's made long before the wind arrives, in the quiet, in the ordinary days. In the small decisions, no one watches and no one applauds. When a surgeon walks into a crisis in the operating room, they are not figuring out how to stay calm in that moment. They're drawing on something already built, a mental posture practiced hundreds of times in lower stakes situations until it became automatic. The calmness doesn't appear because they willed it. It's there because they prepared for it long before they needed it. That is the only kind of calmness that holds. Reaction wears the mask of control. There's a feeling that comes with reacting fast. It feels like doing something. It feels like strength. Someone challenges you, and the response leaves your mouth before the thought has fully formed. A problem lands on your desk, and your hand moves before your mind has assessed the situation. An argument starts to heat up, and you match the temperature, word for word, escalation for escalation. In the moment, it feels decisive. It feels like you're not a pushover, like you're engaged. But look at what actually happened. You responded to someone else's rhythm. You moved when they wanted you to move. You gave them exactly what they were expecting, and in doing so, you handed them control of the exchange. A trader who makes impulsive decisions every time the market shifts isn't demonstrating courage. He's demonstrating that the market runs his mind. A manager who raises her voice in a tense meeting isn't projecting authority. She's showing the room which buttons produce a reaction, and people remember that. This is what makes unchecked reactions so costly. It doesn't just damage the specific moment. It tells everyone paying attention exactly how to steer you in the future. Epictetus taught this clearly. Between what happens and what you do, there is a space, small, sometimes only a second or two. But that space is where your actual agency lives. When you react without pause, you collapse that space entirely. When you respond deliberately, you protect it. The work of building a calm mind is largely the work of expanding that space, making it wider. making it more reliable until it's there, even when the pressure is heaviest. The body moves before the mind decides. When pressure rises, the body doesn't wait for instructions. Your chest tightens, breathing becomes shallow. Your field of vision narrows to the immediate threat. This is ancient biology, a survival system designed for physical danger, not for difficult conversations or collapsed deadlines or a colleague who just undermined you in front of everyone. The rational brain doesn't disappear, but it steps back. And into that gap, instinct fills in. This is why people say things in a moment of stress that they spend the next several months trying to walk back. It's not that they're bad at judgment. It's that, in that moment, they weren't operating from judgment. They were operating from a system that only knows how to handle one kind of threat, and it handles every other kind the same way. The way through this is simpler than most people expect. Your breath is a direct line to your nervous system. When you breathe slowly and deliberately, 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, your body receives a signal that there is no emergency. The stress response begins to soften. The thinking brain re-engages. This is not a relaxation technique, it's a physiological override. Navy divers use this before entering dangerous water. Olympic sprinters use it in the seconds before a final. Surgeons use it mid-procedure when something unexpected appears on the table, not to feel better, to keep their hands precise and their thinking clear. The same tool is available to you. No equipment, no special conditions. You can slow your breath in a boardroom while someone is speaking. You can use it in the pause before you reply to a message that made your stomach drop. You can use it in the hallway outside a conversation you're dreading. When you slow your breath, you are not just calming down. You are choosing, on a physiological level, to keep your thinking online. That is not a small thing. That is the difference between a response that serves you and one that costs you. The question that changes everything. 2 people receive the same difficult news. A project they've led for 8 months is being cancelled. Same facts, same outcome, same morning. The first person asks, "Why is this happening to me?" He replays the decisions, assigns blame, circles the injustice of it. He stays in that loop for days. The second person asks, "What does this tell me that I didn't know before?" She finds something in the wreckage, a flaw in the original plan, a stakeholder relationship that needs rebuilding, a gap in her own understanding of the organization. She moves. The facts were identical. The outcomes will not be. This is what the Stoics meant by the discipline of perception, not denying reality, but choosing the angle from which you engage it. Epictetus didn't have an easy life. He was enslaved. He walked with a permanent limp from an injury inflicted by his owner. And yet, he became one of the most studied philosophers in history because he grasped something most people spend a lifetime resisting. The event does not carry its meaning with it. You assign the meaning. When you ask, "Why me?" you position yourself as a recipient of what life does to you. When you ask, "What can I learn?" you position yourself as someone moving through it, taking something forward. Marcus Aurelius put it directly, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That's not optimism. It's a functional cognitive habit, one that keeps you moving when the most natural instinct is to stop. The reframe doesn't make the difficulty smaller, it changes your relationship to it, and that relationship determines everything that follows. Patience is precision, not passivity. In a world that rewards instant response, patience has become rare enough to be strategic. Most people answer a message the moment it arrives, speak the second a thought forms, force decisions before the situation has fully developed. Speed feels like competence, silence feels like weakness. But consider what actually happens when someone with real patience enters a high-pressure exchange. A negotiator who listens longer than feels comfortable, who asks one more question before making a point, who lets the silence sit for a beat. That person often walks away with far more than the one who rushed to establish their position. Not because they said more, because they understood more before they acted. The archer who holds the bow steady and waits for the wind to shift before releasing isn't hesitating, he's timing. There's a difference. Patience also makes you genuinely difficult to manipulate. If someone knows they can produce a reaction from you on demand by pressing a specific topic, raising their voice, introducing urgency, they can steer every interaction. But a person who cannot be rushed, who will take exactly as long as the situation requires, and no longer, is impossible to pressure. You can't control what you don't control, but you can refuse to be hurried. Seneca wrote, "No great thing is created suddenly." He meant it about everything worth having: skill, character, trust, composure. All of it is built slowly, through the accumulated practice of choosing the longer breath over the immediate reaction. The good news is that the training ground is everywhere. Every cue that tests your patience, every conversation where someone says something you disagree with, every plan that changes without warning. These are not irritations, they are practice. And practice, repeated often enough, becomes character. Train before the storm arrives. The mistake most people make is believing that composure will appear when it's needed most. It won't. Under real pressure, the kind that compresses time and strips away the luxury of thinking clearly, you default to your training. If you've spent every ordinary day reacting to small frustrations without pause, then when something genuinely serious arrives, reaction is your default. It's the path your mind already knows. But if you've been building the habit of the pause in small things, in low-stakes moments, in the daily practice of choosing response over reflex, that habit will be present when the weight is real. Think about how a firefighter trains. The drills don't happen because the work is interesting. They happen because when a building is on fire and the air is black with smoke, there is no time to think. The drill makes the response automatic. The body moves correctly, not because of willpower in that moment, but because of repetition long before it. Your daily life is the drill. Every time you let someone finish speaking before you reply, every time you write the message, close the draft, and send it tomorrow instead. Every time you take one deliberate breath before a conversation you know will be difficult. Every one of those moments is a repetition. Small, unremarkable, private, but they add up. And what they add up to is a mind that doesn't break when the real test arrives. The people who seem unshakable in crises are not that way by accident or temperament. They are that way because they've been training in the quiet, in all the moments no one was watching. Daily habits that build mental strength. Training the mind isn't a single practice. It's a collection of them, each targeting a different layer. Meditation teaches you to notice your thoughts without following every one of them. Most people have never experienced the space between a thought and a reaction. They're so fused with their own thinking that whatever the mind produces feels like an urgent command. 10 minutes of sitting still changes that slowly. You begin to see thoughts as events passing through, not directives. That distance is the foundation of composure. Visualization teaches your brain to recognize success before it happens. Athletes who mentally rehearse a performance activate many of the same neural pathways as those who physically practice it. You're not imagining away difficulty. You're pre-building a map of how you intend to move through it. When the real moment arrives, some part of your mind has already been there. Physical exercise is often overlooked as a mental practice, but its effects on cognition and emotional regulation are well documented. More than the biochemistry, though, there's something in showing up to train when you don't feel like it that builds the same muscle needed for everything else. The discipline transfers. The person who can push through discomfort in a gym tends to push through discomfort elsewhere. Reading not for entertainment but for understanding expands the models you have available when something unexpected happens. The more you've thought about how other people navigated difficulty, the more tools you bring to your own. None of these require hours. What they require is consistency. 10 minutes of meditation, 5 minutes of visualization before a challenging day, a daily walk, a few pages of something worth reading. Done every day, these practices build a foundation that holds under weight. Your environment is not neutral. You are not the only force shaping your mind. The people you spend the most time with, their ways of thinking, their responses to stress, their tolerance for uncertainty, become your reference points. This is not a matter of weakness or susceptibility. It's human neurology. We are wired to calibrate our own responses to the people around us. Spend enough time around people who catastrophize every setback, and you'll find yourself starting to perceive minor problems as catastrophes. Spend time around people who stay functional when things go wrong, who slow down, assess, and move. And that becomes your instinctive response too. Marcus Aurelius chose his advisors carefully, not just for their competence, but for the quality of their thinking under pressure. He understood that the conversations you live inside shape who you become. This doesn't mean cutting everyone out who struggles or complains. Life doesn't work that way, and people deserve better than that. But it does mean being intentional about which voices carry the most weight in your mind. Who leaves you clearer after a conversation? Who leaves you more scattered? That distinction matters more than most people realize. Protecting your mental environment also means being selective about what you feed your attention. The content you consume, news, social media, the ambient noise of whatever is urgent today, all of it shapes your perception of how threatening the world is. A mind that is constantly exposed to alarm will start to perceive alarm everywhere. That's not pessimism, it's conditioning. You choose what you condition your mind toward. The cost of letting emotion drive. Everyone knows what it feels like to lose the edge. The email sent in frustration that took 3 conversations to repair. The decision made under pressure that looked obviously wrong the next morning. The thing said in an argument that the other person never quite forgot, no matter how many times it was apologized for. Emotions are not the enemy. They carry real information. Anger can signal that something genuinely unjust is happening. Fear can be an early warning system. Even panic has its uses. It can mobilize energy in situations where energy is needed fast. But when emotion drives unilaterally, when it takes the wheel without being checked, the information it carries gets drowned out by the intensity of the response. The anger stops being a signal and becomes an action that damages the thing you were trying to protect. The fear stops being a warning and becomes a retreat from something you actually needed to face. The question is never whether to feel, it's whether to act from the first wave. Experienced negotiators know this instinctively. The first offer is rarely the real offer. The first emotional response is rarely the most useful one. Wait for the second thought. The second thought tends to be wiser. This takes practice because the first wave always feels most urgent. It feels like truth. But feelings and truth are not the same thing, and confusing them is the source of most decisions people later regret. The calm mind doesn't suppress the feeling. It lets the feeling arrive, notes what it's communicating, and then chooses how to act. That sequence, feel, note, choose, is the whole practice, applied 10,000 times in 10,000 different situations until it becomes automatic. Calmness as influence. There is something that happens in a room when someone refuses to be swept up in the panic. It's hard to describe until you've witnessed it. The energy shifts. The people who were caught in the loop of alarm start to slow down. Options that weren't visible a moment ago begin to appear. A calm presence doesn't just protect itself, it changes the atmosphere for everyone inside it. This is why composure is not just a personal advantage, it's a form of leadership, not the loud, directive kind of leadership that claims authority. The quiet kind that earns it by being the one person who can still think when thinking is hardest. People remember this, not in the way they remember a strong speech or a decisive announcement. They remember it in the way they remember who they turned to when it mattered, who they called, whose judgment they trusted without having to explain why. That trust doesn't come from competence alone. It comes from the accumulated evidence of watching someone hold steady across many smaller moments. The meeting that went sideways, the deal that fell through, the team crisis that looked unsurvivable from the inside. What did that person do? How did they carry themselves? Composure earns credibility in a way that almost nothing else does, because almost everyone can appear confident when things are going well. What reveals character is what happens when they're not. Calmness is a choice made daily. There will be days you lose it. You'll snap at someone who didn't deserve it. You'll send the message you should have slept on. You'll make the rushed call that costs you time to undo. That is not failure. That is being a person who hasn't finished building something yet. What matters is not perfection. What matters is the direction of travel. Every morning is a renewal of the same commitment. Today, I will create the pause before the reaction. Today, I will slow my breath before I escalate. Today, I will ask what this situation requires of me, rather than simply doing what the moment demands. Not because life will be gentle, it won't. Because you've decided that your peace, your clarity, and your capacity to think well are worth protecting. That no external provocation, no difficult person, no collapsed plan, no sudden loss gets to determine your internal state without your participation. Marcus Aurelius wrote this to himself, not to an audience. He was a man who held enormous power and used it to remind himself daily that his mind was the only thing truly his own. That outside events would always exist. That his response to them was the only territory he actually controlled. That is the territory worth defending. Not with force, with practice. One breath, one pause, one deliberate choice. Repeated until it becomes who you are. The storm will come. It always does. The only question is whether you'll meet it as someone who's been building toward this, or someone still trying to figure it out on the spot. The building begins now, in the ordinary days, in the moments no one applauds. That's where everything that holds is made.